And I would like to introduce our speaker for today, which is Lauren Kennedy from the FSC, and she is going to be talking all things wildflowers about the weird and wonderful world of wildflowers. So Lauren, over to you.
Thank you, Beck. Brilliant. So hopefully you can see my screen. Thank you everybody for joining us today on what is a gorgeous sunny day. I'm Lauren, and today we're going to take a peek into the wonderful world that is wildflowers of the British Isles. This is a huge, colourful and diverse topic. So what we cover this afternoon will barely scratch the surface of the wonder that is the wildflowers of the UK. However, I'm hoping it will inspire you to take a closer look at some plants in your local area with fresh eyes and be inspired to crouch down and take a much closer look. So before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself and how I fell in love with plants. I studied biology at degree level and went on to study conservation biology as a master's. After education, I completed a traineeship with Natural England, and thanks to the inspiring and knowledgeable staff there, I discovered my passion for plants and invertebrates and the interactions between them. This, coupled with my other hobbies and interest in natural history, such as bird watching and bird ringing, I continue to do a lot of survey work in the UK and further afield at Field Station in Sweden. But the part of all of the jobs that I've done that brought me the most joy was sharing my knowledge with others, as so many had done for me. I took a position with the Field Studies Council as a tutor in North Wales. And from that position, I went on to work for Bumblebee Conservation Trust as well as outreach and volunteer officer. I'm now very happy to say that I'm back with the Field Studies Council, working alongside Beck and Aaron as part of the Eco-Skills team. We are a small team working very closely with experts to create really exciting natural history courses, as well as environmental art courses for adults. As Beck's already mentioned, we have loads of really exciting courses running, and quite a few of those are about botany and wildflowers. And of course, I spend all the rest of my free time, what there is of it, looking down, looking at plants and exploring different types of habitat, always in the hope of seeing something new. I have a particular love for mountains and upland plants. So that's enough about me, and I'd love to know a little bit about you. So I would love to know if you already have a favourite wildflower, something that brings you utter joy when you find them out on a walk. So in the chat, there should be a link now to a website where you can add your favourite wildflower. You can add more than one if you'd like, and the posts are anonymous, and at the end they'll come together to create a collage of all of your favorite plants, and maybe we can highlight a favorite of favorites. For some of you, depending on your love and obsession with plants, this might be like choosing your favorite child, but luckily you can put in more than one. And you'll be able to access this link throughout the presentation. We'll take a look at the end. So if you are brand new to looking at wildflowers, and there's a species throughout the presentation that inspires you, then you're welcome to add that to the board as well. As a plant lover, I'm really excited to see the end result. So what will we be taking a look at today? So before we jump into some really extraordinary examples of British wildflowers, we'll take a little peek at how we define a wildflower, how they sit amongst all of our other plants in the UK. And then we will take a look at the ways in which they thrive by attracting pollinators, gaining nutrients, as well as some Bear Grylls style survival skills. And we'll also think about our connection with wildflowers throughout our history. So before taking a look at some brilliant examples of wildflowers, let's take a look at where wildflowers sit amongst the rest of the plants that we find in the UK. So the plant kingdom is broadly composed of 4 evolutionary related groups that you can see along this little line chart. And these groups are defined by a number of different traits, and one of the big differences between them is how they all reproduce. So on the far end, we have bryophytes, which are mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. And then next to those, pteridophytes, which are ferns and their close relatives. These 2 groups, they reproduce via spores. And then next to that, we have our gymnosperms. So these in the UK are conifers. These were the first seed plants. And the word gymnosperm means naked seed. So these seeds are not enclosed within a fruit. The seeds are often on cones, as we all know from spotting conifers. And then on the end, we have our angiosperms. So these are our flowering plants. So in addition to having flowers, the seeds of these plants are enclosed within a fruit. So this means that the seeds are protected. Angio means vessel or container. And this carries with it many advantages, which are directly linked to their success. So it is within angiosperms that we place our wildflowers, all of the examples that I give today. In here, we also find our grasses, sedges, rushes, broadleaf trees and shrubs. Angiosperms are the largest group, with the huge proportion of the world's plants falling into this group. So what does this diversity of plants within angiosperms look like specifically in the UK? So I did say it was a very big topic, and these numbers just prove that. So we have around 3,600 species of flowering plants, angiosperms, in the UK. And it has in brackets that about 1,500 of those are truly native. What we mean by that is this refers to their arrival by natural dispersal, so not plants that have been accidentally or deliberately introduced, which can be is a lot of the time by us or garden escapees. A lot of these introductions might have happened a very long time ago. So all of these species fall into about 120 families, and 70% of the full total of species actually belong to 20 large families. So with so much to explore and learn, looking at wildflowers really is a hobby for life, and you can learn new things all the time. To thrive, our plant species need to be able to obtain nutrients, thrive and survive in lots of different types of conditions and habitats in the UK, and of course to reproduce. The vast majority of our angiosperms rely on assistance to undergo pollination and to reproduce. So we're going to launch a little poll to see what you think. Out of the following methods, which do you think is most popular as a pollination method for our British wildflowers? So that's animals, wind, or water.
This poll is completely anonymous, so do not worry about getting it wrong. Just have a try, have a guess. Yeah, you do not need to worry about getting anything wrong. It's all about learning today.
Thanks, Beck. Fabulous. We're almost at a full house. If you haven't yet cast your vote, do so now. Brilliant. I think that's everyone. Fab. So the majority of you, a huge percentage, are right on the money. It is animals helping out with pollination. That is the most popular method of pollination of our angiosperms. But of course, all of these methods take place in our British wildflowers. So it's for animal pollination,
It's on now. Wicked, it must be brilliant.
It's thought that around 80% of angiosperms rely on pollination by animals. So this includes mammals, birds, and insects. And for wind pollinated plants, these are much lower, but a good chunk of our angiosperms, because our grasses are wind pollinated. So these plants that are pollinated by wind often appear very plain with no need for showy flowers to attract pollinators. And the rarest one is water, with only about 2% pollination occurring this way. So this is specifically for aquatic plants, in which the pollen floats along the water in hope of coming into contact with another flower. So this happens with plants such as pond weeds, for example. So taking a look at our majority, our plants that are pollinated with the help of animals, wildflowers employ a number of tactics in order to enlist the help of an animal for pollination. This can include colour, smell, and of course the promise of a nectar reward after they've brushed past all of the pollen grains. But going that step further than just attractive colours and smells, some plants can mimic their desired pollinator, making them utterly irresistible. This is seen in a number of species within the orchid family especially. Pictured here on the left is a small and often easily missed orchid. It's the fly orchid. And despite the name, this species is actually pollinated by a species of digger wasp that you can see on the right-hand side. You'd be forgiven for not seeing a resemblance in its appearance to either the digger wasp or a fly. However, it has opted instead for investing in their scent and how they feel. So the meaty, musky fragrance that they emit is undetectable by us, but it perfectly mimics the pheromones produced by the female digger wasp, as well as being covered in soft, silky hairs. In attempting to mate with the flower, the male inadvertently picks up lots of pollen and then transfers it to another flower when he tries the tactic again. Another more obvious example, and a plant that is always a joy to spot, is the bee orchid. This species has opted for a more obvious and showy mimicry, as well as producing some pheromones. With its impressive round and furry lobe at the bottom, it does a more convincing job of looking a bit like the tail end of a bumblebee. Unfortunately, due to the lack of its preferred pollinator in the UK, the species that you'll find in the British landscape, as well as other northern areas of its range, opt for self-pollination and aren't able to put their mimicry to good use. When attraction isn't enough, some plants resort to more extreme measures. So moving into a different plant family, this is a very common plant in our countryside. It's Arum maculatum, and it has a lot of different English names. So I've plumped here for Cuckoo Pint as being maybe the most common, along with Lords and Ladies, but others include Adam and Eve, Adder's Root, Wild Arum, Jack in the Pulpit, an interesting one, Bloody Man's Finger, and loads more. There are certain plants in the UK that really do attract a huge host of English names, and this is definitely one of them. It's a really eye-catching plant. It's very different to a lot of our other species. It doesn't conform to the regular shape that you would find lots of our British wildflowers. And you can find it in woodland edge, and in hedgerows. It uses flies to pollinate, and so it attracts them by emitting a really foul smell, a urine-like odour from the club-shaped spike in the center. So you can see on the left-hand side, this spike is lighter in color, and in the middle picture, it's darker. They do vary in their shades. So it's that spike in the middle that emits a smell to attract flies. However, it also has an extra clever tactic to make sure the smell really travels. It has the rare capability to be able to heat itself through chemical reactions within its cells. So this helps spread the scent further afield to attract as many flies as possible. So when the flies land, they travel down the plant into that sort of bulge, that shape that you can see at the very base of the spike. And as they enter that and they're lured in, the little flowers are actually in little rings within inside that. And in the picture on the right, you can just see the little black specks. And above it, you can see all of these sort of curly hairs. And it's those that trap the flies inside, not permanently, but it's hard enough to get out that they bounce about in there and get covered in pollen. And by the time they've managed to free themselves, they're covered in pollen, and then off they fly to fall for the same trick again. In doing so, they deposit the pollen from the other plant into the new plant, and thus pollinating and allowing the plant to produce fruits, which look like this. They're very eye-catching, bright red and orange, and highly poisonous. They really do stand out. So like you can see in these fruits, the seeds are harbored inside and protected by that fruit coating. And now what it needs is for these seeds to disperse away from the parent plant to give them the best chance of survival. Wildflowers employ a bunch of different tactics to increase and maximize their seed dispersal. Some of them are very commonplace, like dandelion clocks, which are all blowing around right now. Using wind to disperse their seeds is very effective for this plant. We have some seeds, fruits and seeds that are sticky or barbed and hooked. So this example here is cleavers or sticky weed. It's got lots of English names. It's Gallium aparine. It's in the bedstraw family. And I'm sure lots of you will know exactly how difficult it is to prise them off your clothing if you've managed to brush past them, but doing an excellent job at carrying them around on your walk and depositing them as you try to pull them off. And of course, fleshy fruits, so fruits that are attractive as food, things like blackberries, and loads of other examples of fleshy fruits in the UK. We do a good job at helping to spread those, as well as small mammals and birds. Some plants take a more explosive approach with seed pods that burst open. So lots of peas, for example, their pods dry and burst open to dispel the seeds. A rather infamous example is Himalayan balsam, which is an invasive plant in the UK, and its explosive seed dispersal has definitely helped it to spread as quickly as it has. And another example is the small and unassuming violet, which also partakes in seed dispersal fireworks. The violet seeds of the common dog violet, which is pictured here, can eject their seeds at some velocity as the membranes that hold the seeds in place shrink away, and that causes the seeds to expel from the small casing, and they can travel up to 3 to 4 feet, which is pretty impressive. So it doesn't just end there. There are plants that can go the extra mile in the hope of actually going the extra mile. And that's through the production of an extra tasty little treat on the seed itself. So all of these images here are seeds of different species that are all producing this little sort of fleshy structure that is full of lipids and proteins. It is particularly attractive to ants, and they come along and pick the seed up as these little fleshy structures called eliosomes are really tasty treats for their larvae. So they'll carry the seed into their colony, they'll feed that eliosome to the larvae, but then the seed itself is too hard to be broken down. So it's left in the soil, or it's disposed of in the waste area of the colony, which is full of organic matter, and thus has been planted by the ants themselves. So they're in the perfect spot for germination. It's an incredibly smart move and definitely pays off and helps these seeds spread. So some of these species are really common, and I'll highlight a few now. You might have been planting some over the spring. I know I have. This top one circled here is borage. I was planting some just a month ago. You have greater celandine there. And then down the bottom, green alkanet. And this last one is comfrey. So these are just a few examples of some seeds that have this extra little treat in the hope of enticing ants to help them spread. But it's not just pollination and seed dispersal that helps to ensure that our wildflowers thrive. Plants also need to obtain nutrients from their environment. So water and minerals are taken up by the roots, and using photosynthesis in the leaves to convert light energy into sugars. But some plants have really brilliant adaptations to aid in their uptake of nutrients. A really great example of that is yellow rattle. This plant is what we would call hemiparasitic. So it has parasitic capabilities, but it also still can photosynthesize and produce its own sugars. And what this ingenious little plant does is it can obtain water and minerals from other plants. This plant is in the broomrate family, and quite a few, or if not all, of the species in this family have this capability. So this is just one example. As the roots of the yellow rattle develop underground, they seek out the roots of other plants growing nearby, and they have a particular love for grasses. Once they make contact, the yellow rattle can draw water and nutrients out of the grass's roots, and this can suppress the growth of grasses by as much as 60%. This suppresses the growth around the yellow rattle, and it actually allows space for other wildflowers to pop up. So it can really increase the diversity of wildflowers in an area. Because of this, it has earned the name by conservationists as the meadow maker. The unusual shaped and bright yellow flowers turn into brown papery seed pods, which you can just see on the right-hand image. And it's these little seed pods that give the English name yellow rattle, as they make excellent alternatives to maracas. A more extreme example can be found in the rarer species Dodder. So this plant is very unusual. It's rootless and it's completely parasitic, and it uses host plants like heather, gorse, and clover to be able to gain its nutrients. It does it by curling around the stems and using little suckers to extract the nutrients that it needs. Unlike yellow rattle, Dodder doesn't possess any green pigments. You can see all the stems are red. And because of this, it can't undergo photosynthesis. It relies completely on the host for all the nutrients that it needs. The red thread-like stems you can see curling around the plants on the right-hand side, it's growing all over the heather there. And this species, as I said, it's rarer and seems to be associated with the south of the UK. So gaining nutrients, whether it's by yourself or with the help of others, is essential for plants, and particularly important in plants that live in more extreme environments, so environments that lack readily available nutrients. Being a parasite is one way to adapt, whereas other species have turned to a more varied diet in order to get the nutrients that it needs. I am, of course, in this case, talking about carnivorous plants and the fascinating lives they lead. You don't need to travel very far or to the tropics, for example, to see carnivorous plants in action. We have some brilliant examples right here in the UK. This example is the Roundleaved Sundew. It's really eye-catching, always a joy to find, and it can be found in boggy and fenland areas. So as you might expect, these areas have low available nutrients. So by trapping your dinner, you're supplementing your diet and gaining the nutrients that you need to survive. The sundew lures small insects with the promise of sticky, sugary liquid, which you can see glistening on the edges of these little red appendages that stick out from the leaves. By the time the insects realized its terrible mistake, this sticky liquid has it stuck onto the leaf, and the leaf itself starts to curl around them and secrete enzymes to break the insect down into easily absorbed nutrients. We also have an aquatic carnivorous plant, which is a far less obvious example, as all of the interesting stuff is happening under the water. So this plant is called Bladderwort, common bladderwort in this case. And on the left-hand side, you can see the above water parts of the plant. So a long stem reaching out of the water, where you can see these really bright yellow flowers. So nothing unusual here. But on the image on the right, this is what is happening underneath the surface. The bladderwort traps small organisms in these tiny little bladders, which are all along the branched leaf structures, fully submerged under the water. The vacuum trapping system that they use is thought to be one of the most sophisticated within the plant kingdom. So the trapping occurs in these tiny bladders. So let's zoom in and take a little look at what they look like up close. So the mechanism itself is purely mechanical. The bladders push out water through their cells, causing the sides of that little bean-shaped bladder to push in, and it creates a vacuum. On the outside, you can see this little protrusion. This is the trigger hair. So as a little insect is swimming past, the slightest touch will trigger that hair. And when it does, it causes a break in the trap door. And in doing so, the little bladder expands and sucks in the water along with the little insect that had no idea it was even there. On the outside of the cells around the trapdoor, they secrete a sugary substance that helps to keep the trapdoor sealed. And it's thought that maybe that also helps to attract prey. The trapdoor itself operates at speeds that rank among the fastest plant movements known, with the trapping occurring in as little as 1/100th of a second. Once inside the trap, the prey is digested by enzymes, and with a couple of hours at most, the trap is ready to be set again. It's an incredibly ingenious way to survive living in submerged fresh water, where nutrients that you'd find in the soil is far less available So using those little insects is the way to gain those. So living in water is quite a stressful habitat, stress on the plant, but we have lots of other extremes in the UK. So how do they deal with different environments? We are about to launch a poll to see what you think, what kind of lengths can plants go to? Do wildflowers contain antifreeze? Do they have the ability to contain antifreeze? True or false? Yeah, a super quick one. And considering this is the weird and wonderful, most of you have got that pretty quickly. Brilliant. Yeah, overwhelming vote for true there, and you'd be correct. It is true. Some species of plants can contain antifreeze proteins, which is pretty impressive. A really popular, famous example of this is, of course, the beautiful snowdrop. These are a member of the daffodil family, and there are lots of different types of snowdrops. And in cold spells, you'll often see snowdrops that might collapse to the ground, only to then resurrect themselves the next day or as temperatures start to rise again. The antifreeze proteins that are in their cells help to inhibit ice crystals forming and limit the spread of those ice crystals as well, so protecting the plant cells from damage. The snowdrop has an extra defense against the cold, and their leaves themselves have hardened tips that help them break through frozen soil. So these are essential qualities for plants that grow and flower at the end of winter and deal with these chillier conditions. But it's not just chilly conditions as an extreme in the UK. We have a variety of habitats. We have areas that are extreme due to exposure and lack of fresh water, and believe it or not, warm temperatures. That's easy to believe on such a lovely week as this one. So some plants are especially adapted to very dry environments, which could be our coastlines or salt marshes, areas that lack soil, that are exposed, mountain tops, mountain sides, exposed to wind and desiccation, and lack that easily accessible fresh water. So there are a number of ways that our British plants can protect themselves if they want to live in an area like that. So on the left, we have the striking yellow horned poppy. As you can see, this poppy is growing on shingle. And if we take a closer look at its colour, you can see that the leaves and stems are a grey, bluey tinge, not a bright green that you would associate with most vascular plants. This is termed glaucus, and it's the wax accumulation on the leaves that helps to retain water. But the colour also helps how the light is reflected and scattered from its surface, so it protects the cells from UV damage. So it does a lot better than an average vascular plant in that situation. In the centre, we have a species living very close to salt water. This is sea lavender. It's a species that tolerates really high salt content and thrives in salt marsh habitat. It does this by actively secreting sodium to help the internal sodium levels remain low so they don't affect its biological function and its ability to photosynthesize. So it can capitalize on salt marsh real estate because not many other plants can do this. Despite the name, it doesn't actually smell like lavender, but does have beautiful purple flowers. And on the left, we have an example of one of our native succulent species. This is biting stonecrop. The tactic employed here is stay close to the ground and hold on to your water. This species grows just 5 to 10 centimeters high, and they form a dense mat for protection. Its little tiny leaves, like little swollen appendages, are swollen with moisture and are also small to reduce the surface area in which water can escape, all allowing them to live in really dry, stony habitats, so they can thrive where fresh water may be scarce. So you can find them on rocky areas along the coast, and they also make great additions to green roofs and those sort of bare environments. So plants are full of incredible adaptations, and I've mentioned lots of examples there of relationships with plants within the natural world, but one that is of particular importance is our relationship with wildflowers. And how could we talk about weird and wonderful without touching on our history, which is so intertwined with wildflowers and our uses for them? We are forever changing the way our landscape looks, and as a result, we're always influencing the plants that are present today. Through agriculture, through deliberate planting and introductions, through urbanization, and loads of other indirect influences on our surroundings, wildflowers have found many ways to adapt and continue to do so. For some, it's easier than others, and we create the conditions for some to thrive over others. And throughout our history, wildflowers have become really important symbols culturally, so not just for their obvious uses. An amazing adaptation and safety feature for a lot of wildflowers and their seeds is seed dormancy. So this is when seeds are able to remain in the soil without germinating straight away. Lots of seeds can do this, and a really great example is the common poppy or the corn poppy. And a poll is just launched to see if you can guess how long these seeds are able to remain dormant. So this poppy is intertwined into our history as a really important cultural symbol and a big part of the British landscape. But how long do you think our seeds can survive in the seed bank before they germinate? Give it a few more seconds, just a couple more to go. Okay, it's quite split, so I'll share the results. But the majority, only by 9%, is for 80 years and over, and that is correct. They can live for a whopping, can survive rather, for a whopping 80 years plus in the soil as seeds. So in doing so, they are safeguarding themselves against change, against conditions that aren't quite right. So they are waiting for biding their time until the conditions are right, and then the seeds will germinate. Quite a few plants are able to do this, but it's the corn poppy that takes the that wins the record for the longest. We, of course, rely on plants as a food source, and so often for their medicinal properties. A lot of tales and folklore were based initially on magical uses of plants and superstition rather than science. However, a lot of those have proved highly effective and are still being used today. Some plants have played such an important role in early medicine, and that has been reflected in their English names, in their popular names. These are some really great examples, but are just a few on a very long list. So on the left, this one is comes up in a lot of literature as it's also known as heel-all, a bit of a catch-all for medicinal plants. It's a really common species, self-heal. It's in the dead nettle or mint family, and it'll pop up everywhere in your lawns, anywhere in your garden. I would defy you to be able to find a spot without it a majority of the time. And it's common, as this common name suggests, it's been used for a long list of different ailments throughout our history. Everything from stopping profuse bleeding and healing wounds to treating heart disease and sore throats. Really does do it all. The plant in the middle, scurvy grass. This is a low-growing plant from the cabbage family. It can tolerate salt spray, so it's often found along the coast. But nowadays you can find it inland following motorways and roads that have been gritted or salt sprayed over the winter, and it creates the perfect conditions on the side of the road for these plants that can tolerate that slight saline content in the soil. As the name suggests, they are a great treatment historically for scurvy because the leaves are packed with vitamin C. So it's said that bundles were dried and taken aboard ships, or extract was distilled in order to give to sailors on long voyages. And the final one out of these examples is eyebright. It's one of my personal favourite plants. Standing at just 5 to 10 centimetres high, it really is very, very dinky. It's in the broomrape family and has the most beautiful, albeit tiny, flowers. As the name suggests, throughout history, it's been used for all manner of eye-related ailments. As I mentioned, these are just a few examples of a very long list of medicinal plants. Humans have been cataloguing and using wildflowers for medicine throughout our time on this planet. Within the first known texts that feature medicinal plants, many were mixed in with superstition and folklore, with lots of text noting medicinal properties as well as their ability to protect against evil and many other uses. Much of the folklore and fables throughout our history talk of using wildflowers for protection, for rituals, as cultural symbols. And one that pops up time and time again is plantain, which may seem like a very drab example. And I've chosen a particularly tatty example there. But that's exactly why it's written about so much in texts about magical herbs. It's thought that the link to resilience is exactly why it was favoured so much by herbalists, as no matter how much this plant is disturbed, and this example here is broadleaf plantain, no matter how much it's disturbed or trampled on walkways, it's still able to survive. It's incredibly tough and hardy, and the leaves themselves have elastic-like thread structures throughout them. It's thought that that particular property allowed it to qualify as a divination herb, so stretching out our sight into the future. Using wildflowers as symbols due to their shape and features was commonly used and still is today. This is particularly apparent with herb Paris on the right-hand side. This plant is very different, very unusual in its shape and structure. It's an ancient woodland indicator. You can find it flowering amongst bluebells and primroses in damp woodlands. And its whorl of 4 leaves also gives it the name of the herb of equality, because all of its parts are considered equal and harmonious. The symmetry really appealed to medieval herbalists, and it was also used in marriage rituals for that equality description. There are many more examples of our connections with wildflowers that go way beyond just beauty and function. I really hope that some of those examples have inspired you to explore the world of wildflowers, whether that's just stopping to appreciate the beauty in what many would term weeds, or furthering your knowledge through some of our FSC guides or coming along to a course, or getting involved in wildflower recording, or just thinking a little bit more about our connection with wildflowers. So thank you so much for listening. I would be happy to take some questions, and we can take a little peek at some of the wildflowers you submitted to the Menti board.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lauren. So if any of you do have a question, if you would like to raise your virtual hand, then we can spot you. You can unmute yourself and ask Lauren a question. Otherwise, we will go to Aaron whilst we wait for people if you want to come forward to give us some chat questions.
Yeah, sure. So just to start us off, so we've got a question from Joe. Is there evidence or examples of plants making evolutionary adaptations in response to human pressures?
That's a very, very good question. I think there's definitely a lot of research currently about adaptations to climate change and global warming and pollution. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any specific examples from those, but I know that there are plenty. But seed dormancy is an example of an evolutionary adaptation that's developed over time that specifically fights those drastic changes in conditions. But there are many, many more.
Awesome. If you talk about dormancy, how do seeds remain dormant and not decompose?
So there are proteins and enzymes, the makeup of these seeds ensure that they're able to survive for a really long time. There are some that don't have that feature, so have to germinate within the year that they're dropped. So it all depends on the composition, the chemical composition of the seeds. It is very impressive.
I've read an article, it was a little while ago now. I think they found some seeds in China, and it was for a magnolia tree or something, and then they planted them and the tree actually grew, which is amazing.
Yeah, wasn't it like thousands of years? Those seeds were thousands of years old. It's incredible.
Incredible. Which areas of the country have the greatest diversity of wildflowers?
Oh, that's a great question. Areas where you have good mixes of habitat and quite a lot of chalk grassland are often very good. I don't know if it ranks as the highest, but Kent as a county is very high diversity. But I'm pretty sure there's areas of the Midlands and the North as well that can rival it. But yeah, a mixture of habitats, and chalk grassland is a really great place as well. So that definitely boosts the diversity of a county if you have some chalk.
Awesome. We have a question from Diane. I'm not sure what this is, but herb Paris, is it declining?
So it's definitely not that common. And I think based on how we use our landscape, the areas that it needs to grow, that damp woodland, definitely doesn't cover as much of a percentage of the UK as it used to. I grew up in South Wales, so I saw it a lot there. So to me, it wasn't a rare species. But after I moved out of Wales, I realised actually I was spoilt for that particular species and for woodlands in general. And it is now harder to find. Yet you need older, damp woodland, which, as you can imagine, is definitely harder to find.
Awesome. We have a question about the seeds which the ants were carrying underground. And what was the word for the treat bit?
For the what bit? Sorry,
the treat bit that the ants feed on.
It's a lyosome. So I can type that in the chat. But yeah, it's incredible. And some plants Some very, very common plants do it. Borage is a really common one, but things like red dead nettle do it as well. So you see that everywhere along roadsides and just everywhere. And now you can appreciate just how well it does thanks to its army of little helpers. So I've just popped that word in the chat now. It's eliasome.
Amazing. Awesome. I have a question from Cynthia. It's asked, as the landscape has been developing since the last exposure from the Ice Age, at what date do you consider plants in the UK to be native? If you know.
Oh, yes, very good question. I think technically, off the top of my head, I think it's really a very long time ago. I think it's 1600 or something like that. I'd need to check, but yeah, it's a very long time ago. Q says before, yeah. So, yeah. So Gillian, thank you. 15 for Q. Yes, around then.
Question from Bonnie that's asking, what books would you recommend for learning more about wildflowers and plants in general?
Books, yeah, I've always got some to hand. Let's have a look. For ID, my favorite is the Wildflower Key, which is Francis Rose. So if you're interested in taking a closer look at identifying plants. But there's loads of other books that are great to read a bit more about how we connect with plants and things like that. So Richard, maybe Weeds, that I absolutely love that book. And Leif Sweden's book about orchids as well. Both of these cover elements of our uses and folklore, medicinal purposes and connections with pollinators. So they're really good reads. But yeah, Francis Rose is probably my favorite for ID.
Awesome. And I have a question. Can we plant carnivorous plants in our garden?
What, can we put them in our garden?
Yeah, I love them, but I've not got any. And
if you create the right conditions, yeah, I know of a few people that have created little bog gardens, little bog elements of their gardens. So it depends on lots of conditions of your garden already. But yeah, you can create quite acidic bog-like areas, which I know it's worked for a number of people. So yeah, you definitely can. And I was going to share the screen as well of everybody's wildflower favorite wildflowers. There's a really lovely mix. Bluebells, greater stitchwort, forget-me-not, and red campion seem to be the largest on there. So the most often put in, all really gorgeous plants. And cowslip, lots of woodland plants and lots of plants that are in flower now. Oh, pasque flower, that's a really gorgeous plant that you can find in chalk grass, and I've only ever seen it in France. I've never gotten down to the right area to see it in the UK, but a really beautiful one. So thank you to everybody who put those in. I'll enjoy taking a read through all of them later, actually.
That's it for questions for us.
Great. Well, if no one has any other questions, as Lauren said, there are lots of things coming up with the FSC around wildflowers. So do keep your eye on our newsletter if you are registered, and our website, because there are lots of things. We've got a wonderful botany course and a great wildflower folklore course as well. So yeah, keep an eye on those. I've also just going to drop the links to registering for your free wildlife guides and also taking advantage of that discount I was mentioning. And Aaron's just dropped some more links as well. But thank you again, everyone, so much for coming. As I said, there has been a feedback email sent, so it'd be great if you could share your feedback on the talk. And of course, this will be uploaded to YouTube, and that link will be sent probably by the end of the week.
Oh, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.